Not many women in the medieval period ruled alone, and far fewer led charge into battle. In fact, most women fitting this description were stories, legends, or myths. But Matilda of Tuscany was a living example of a powerful woman who ruled in her own right, fought against her enemies while leading her troops into battle, and would become a formidable force in league with the Pope and the powerful medieval church. Matilda of Tuscany, often referred to as Matilda of Canossa or the Great Countess, was born around 1046 into the powerful House of Canossa. Although no precise record of her exact birth date exists, most scholars agree on the mid-1040s based on genealogical references and Doniso's chronicle. Her father, Boniface III, sometimes called Boniface of Canossa, served as the Margrave or Marquis of Tuscany, a title signifying the ruler of a march or border region within the Holy Roman Empire. In practice, however, Boniface held sway over a vast stretch of territory in northern and central Italy, including parts of Lombardy, Emilia, and Tuscany proper. Matilda's mother, Beatrice of Lorraine, came from the upper echelons of European nobility. Through this maternal line, Matilda gained connections to the powerful Duchy of Upper and Lower Lorraine in what is now Belgium, the Netherlands, and parts of Germany and northeastern France. This dual lineage reinforced the Canossa family's standing as a trans-regional powerhouse. They were able to negotiate marriages, alliances, and political arrangements that spanned the Alps, linking the Holy Roman Empire's northern and southern realms. Geographically, the Canossa estates served as a hinge between the papal states to the south and the imperial lands to the north. Not only did this confer strategic significance on the family, but it also placed them at the heart of ongoing tensions between the emperor in Germany and the Pope in Rome. Control over major trade routes, prosperous agricultural lands, and important bishoprics such as those in Lucca, Florence, and Pisa allowed Boniface and his successors to enjoy revenue and influence that few noble houses in Italy could match. Because the House of Canossa traced its lineage back to the 10th century, a sense of dynastic pride permeated its court. From an early age, Matilda would have absorbed stories of her ancestors' exploits in defending Italian territory or forging alliances with both secular and ecclesiastical figures. This heritage eventually shaped her self-perception as not merely a steward of land, but also a protector of ecclesiastical liberty and a guardian of the church's interests, a stance that would become central to her adult life. Matilda's father was assassinated in 1052 while mediating local disputes. The motivations behind his murder remain somewhat obscure, though some historians suggest it may have arisen from feudal rivalries or internal dissent. With Boniface gone, the enormous burden of managing and defending the Canossa dominions fell on his widow Beatrice and her children, Matilda and her older sister Beatrice, and brother Frederick, who died young. According to Donizo's Vita Matildis, as well as contemporary imperial records, Holy Roman Emperor Henry III sought to capitalize on the perceived vulnerability of the Canossa estates after Boniface's death. The emperor effectively compelled Beatrice to marry Godfrey the Bearded, Duke of Lower Lorraine, who was also a distant cousin on her Lorraine side. This marital arrangement helped Henry III keep a close watch on northern Italy. By entwining the Canossa possessions with the duchies of Lorraine, Henry III minimized the risk that powerful Italian nobles would challenge imperial authority unchecked. However, this second marriage ignited further complications. Godfrey the Bearded had his own agendas tied to Lorraine politics, and his loyalty to the emperor was at times ambivalent. Meanwhile, Empress Agnes, Henry III's widow, and later Henry IV, once he came of age, kept a keen eye on Tuscany and Lombardy, recognizing their strategic importance. In the swirl of imperial interventions, local revolts, and shifting alliances, Matilda spent her early childhood in a near-constant state of political flux. On more than one occasion, she relocated between castles such as Canossa, Mantua, and Lorraine's strongholds. Beatrice herself was a politically astute noblewoman, and she worked tirelessly to safeguard her children's inheritance against hostile local magnates and imperial overreach. Documentary evidence reveals her strategic use of marriage arrangements and her negotiations with influential bishops to maintain the family's network of support. Matilda, though still a child, was undoubtedly exposed to these diplomatic maneuvers. Whether observing her mother receiving delegations or being present during critical discussions on alliance building, Matilda was immersed in high-stakes political theatre from the start, and importantly, viewing a woman taking on these traditionally male roles and succeeding. Tragedy and upheaval remained a recurring theme. Matilda's elder sister died as a child. Her brother Frederick also passed away, though exact details differ among chroniclers. By the late 1050s, Matilda stood as the sole surviving heir of the House of Canossa. These losses rendered her position even more critical. Should anything happen to her, the entire Canossa line, and with it control of Tuscany, might have passed to competing claimants. This precarious status underscored how essential it was for Matilda to be trained not just in traditional noblewomen's pursuits, such as household management, but in the broader arts of rulership, negotiation, and, if needed, military strategy. Despite, or perhaps because of, the political volatility she encountered, Matilda benefited from an unusually thorough education for a noblewoman of the 11th century. She had high literacy, particularly in Latin, which was the language of the Church and of most official documents in Europe. Being literate afforded Matilda a significant advantage in dealing directly with ecclesiastical and imperial correspondences, allowing her to bypass intermediaries who might manipulate letters for their own benefit. Instruction in Latin naturally extended to reading biblical texts, a foundation that helped nurture her deep sense of piety. Later in life, Matilda would become known for her devout spirituality and her staunch advocacy for the Gregorian reform. Alongside her book learning, Matilda gained extensive exposure to estate governance. As a child, she observed her mother adjudicating disputes among vassals, receiving envoys, and administering taxes or tribute. She learned the complexities of feudal obligations in northern Italy, where local bishops, counts, and princes often held overlapping authorities. The Canossa household also managed multiple fortresses, farmland, and trade routes, requiring robust organizational skills that Matilda would one day wield as effectively as any male counterpart. Military leadership, though seldom taught formally to women in the Middle Ages, was another critical area in which Matilda would distinguish herself. Documents from the mid to late 11th century illustrate her involvement in overseeing the garrisons of key fortresses. While still in her teens, she was privy to discussions on troop mobilizations and defense strategies, learning from experienced castellans and knights employed by the Canossa estate. Although men typically led armies in open battle, Matilda's knowledge of military logistics, siegecraft, and castle defense would later prove indispensable in her confrontations with imperial forces loyal to Henry IV. The unique combination of spiritual fervor and political military acumen set Matilda apart from many of her contemporaries. By the time she reached her early 20s, she was already recognized among northern Italy's elites as a shrewd negotiator and a devout guardian of the church. This reputation laid the groundwork for her most famous role, the champion of Pope Gregory VII and the papal reform movement during the investiture controversy. By the mid-11th century, power dynamics in northern and central Italy were anything but stable. While the Holy Roman Emperor nominally held sovereignty over these regions, local noble families, nascent city-states, and influential bishops frequently challenged imperial authority. In particular, cities such as Milan, Pisa, and Florence had begun to develop a degree of communal autonomy, governed by their own consuls and emerging civic institutions. This transition was one of the earliest manifestations of the Italian city-state model that would flourish in the centuries to come, but in Matilda's era it provoked friction as local leaders sought to curtail imperial interference. Amid this backdrop, numerous dynasties, including the Ostensi and the various Lombard counts, jockeyed for control of trade routes and fortresses. Feudal lords felt pressure to expand or safeguard their territories by forging alliances, sometimes turning to the Pope in Rome or the Emperor in Germany for additional backing. Loyalty, however, could be fragile. An ally in one campaign might become a rival in the next. Intensifying matters, ecclesiastical authority over bishoprics was also contested, igniting disputes about who had the right to invest bishops with office, the emperor or the pope. This tension would soon culminate in the later investiture controversy, with Matilda playing a leading role in support of the reform-minded papacy. Such a chaotic environment often led to military confrontations. At times, armies financed by the emperor descended from the Alps to reassert control, only to find themselves resisted by local conscripts loyal to urban communes or noble families with entrenched fortifications. Conversely, the Pope leveraged the discontent of local powers to diminish imperial sway over central Italy. Within this unstable framework, strategic strongholds and the families who held them became essential gatekeepers determining whether papal or imperial campaigns would succeed. The House of Canossa was among the most powerful of these noble families. Their territories stretched from the Po Valley to the Apennine passes, encompassing a sprawling domain in Tuscany, Emilia, and parts of Lombardy. Central to their influence was a chain of strongholds positioned at critical junctures of major trade and military routes. The castle of Canossa, perched on a rocky outcrop near Reggio Emilia, was the most emblematic of these fortresses. According to the Vita Matildis, Canossa was not only a secure refuge, but also a prestigious centre where bishops, clerics and ambassadors regularly met to negotiate alliances or discuss ecclesiastical reforms. The investiture controversy was one of the most consequential power struggles of the medieval period, playing out in the late 11th and early 12th centuries. At its heart lay the question of who held legitimate authority to appoint or invest bishops and abbots, the secular rulers led by the Holy Roman Emperor or the papacy. Traditionally, kings and emperors had claimed the right to select high-ranking clergy within their dominions, granting them not only ecclesiastical office but also secular rights and lands attached to those offices. However, the reform-minded popes of the mid-11th century, exemplified by Pope Gregory VII, wanted to free the church from what they perceived as the corrupting influence of lay control. Gregory VII's vision was radical. He insisted that only the Pope could invest bishops, and that secular rulers, Henry IV foremost among them, should cease interfering in ecclesiastical appointments. This stance was famously articulated in the Dictatus Papae, a series of propositions underscoring papal supremacy. Henry IV, the young Holy Roman Emperor, saw Gregory's reforms as an affront to royal prerogative. Their escalating conflict soon included open defiance, mutual condemnation, and political alliances across Italy and Germany. When Gregory excommunicated Henry in 1076, calling into question his legitimacy to rule, the emperor's authority was thrown into crisis, prompting him to seek reconciliation with the Pope. Against this backdrop, Matilda's actions became pivotal to shaping the ultimate outcome of the controversy. Matilda had assumed the sole leadership of the Canossa estates in 1076 following the death of her mother Beatrice. By this time, she was already in her late 20s or early 30s and had been part of various negotiations that shaped the House of Canossa's alliances. Her mother's passing allowed her to bring her personal convictions to the forefront. Matilda believed in the ideals of church reform and considered Gregory VII a spiritual mentor. Through both religious devotion and dynastic calculation, she positioned herself as the Pope's staunch ally in northern Italy. The most famous episode linking Matilda and Gregory VII to the investiture controversy is the meeting at Canossa in January 1077. After being excommunicated, Emperor Henry IV sought absolution to restore his legitimacy. He crossed the Alps in harsh winter conditions to reach the castle of Canossa. Details vary in the sources, but all concur that Henry stood outside the fortress, likely barefoot and wearing a hair shirt, under cold, snowy conditions for 3 days before the Pope agreed to lift the excommunication. Whether Matilda personally orchestrated Henry's humiliating vigil is debated. The Vita Matildis implies that Matilda played an essential role, providing the Pope with refuge and acting as an intermediary between the chastened emperor and the resolute pontiff. Some historians suggest that her diplomatic finesse contributed to a settlement that temporarily recognized Henry's repentance. What is clear is that the symbolic weight of Canossa cannot be overstated. It signified papal ascendancy over the emperor and demonstrated Matilda's castle, and by extension, her political power, as the site where that drama unfolded. Consequently, going to Canossa became shorthand for submission to ecclesiastical authority. Matilda, by virtue of her hospitality and alliance with Gregory, was thrust even more firmly onto the stage of European politics. While Henry IV's penance briefly eased tensions, the compromise unravelled in subsequent years. Henry regrouped politically and militarily, and Gregory found himself in need of continued support from powerful allies. Matilda remained resolute in siding with the Pope, even as her stance exposed her lands to potential retaliation from pro-imperial forces. The Canossa incident hence proved only a temporary truce, with the larger conflict persisting well beyond 1077. Nonetheless, Matilda's personal loyalty to Gregory never wavered. She continued to offer sanctuary in her fortresses whenever he was threatened and funneled resources to his cause. One of Matilda's most crucial forms of support involved the direct financial backing of Gregory VII's political and military ventures. Unlike some of her noble peers, Matilda personally controlled extensive revenues generated by her lands across Tuscany, Emilia, and Lombardy. Detailed references in Donizo's chronicle confirm her stewardship of agricultural estates, trade routes, toll stations, and local industries. These revenues underwrote the Pope's ability to hire mercenaries, maintain loyal militias, and sustain ecclesiastical and diplomatic missions critical to the reform movement. Although medieval sources rarely provide precise financial figures, historians argue that Matilda's wealth significantly bolstered Gregory's capacity to resist Henry IV in Italy. By acting as a stable resource base, Matilda's dominions gave the papacy a strategic advantage, particularly since the emperor's energies were divided between ongoing revolts in Germany and the need to reassert influence south of the Alps. But Matilda's role was not limited to funding. She also mobilized her own armed forces in defense of papal prerogatives. In a departure from the usual medieval pattern where female lords rarely led armies, Matilda took on a highly visible leadership position. She commanded vassals loyal to her through the feudal obligations of the Canossa network, organizing them into defensive and offensive maneuvers against imperial allies. Notably, she orchestrated the defense of key castles in the Apennines, forcing Henry IV's armies to undertake protracted and costly sieges, which often resulted in stalemates or minor victories for Matilda's side. Given the norms of the period, the fact that soldiers willingly followed a female ruler underscores Matilda's formidable reputation for both piety and martial competence. Chroniclers occasionally expressed astonishment at how effectively she managed logistical tasks such as provisioning and garrison rotations. H.E.J. Cowdery highlights that Matilda's personal authority and charisma, rooted partly in her devout image, helped her secure loyalty in an era unaccustomed to women commanding armies on multiple fronts. While battles and sieges drew the most attention, Matilda's political savvy also played out in the diplomatic sphere. She corresponded with other reform-minded bishops and monastic leaders, ensuring that Gregory's policies found regional support. By maintaining communications across Italy and even into Germany, she helped forge a network of ecclesiastical allies who coordinated strategies against the emperor's supporters. In this sense, Matilda acted as both a general and a diplomat, leveraging her knowledge of northern Italian politics, acquired during her tumultuous childhood, to predict and counter imperial moves. This diplomatic work involved more than just penning letters. Matilda received envoys at her various strongholds and hosted councils of bishops, offering them secure meeting places away from the emperor's oversight. Such gatherings proved essential to consolidating the papal reform party. A number of these councils reaffirmed Gregory's stance on lay investiture, supporting the principle that only church authorities could appoint bishops. In effect, Matilda's fortresses became hubs of ecclesiastical policy-making and planning. Even with Matilda's robust support, the papacy faced setbacks. Henry IV, emboldened by victories in Germany, launched renewed campaigns in Italy, occasionally capturing smaller Canossa fortifications. The Pope's excommunication of Henry had ripple effects, including schisms among German princes and the rise of anti-kings who contested Henry's throne. In 1080, Gregory excommunicated Henry IV for a second time, intensifying hostilities. Matilda's forces were spread thin at times, facing alliances of imperial supporters. Nonetheless, Matilda's strategic advantage, her castle's defensive strength, and her enduring reputation among reform sympathizers allowed her to weather these storms. She demonstrated a remarkable capacity to pivot. If one fortress fell, she regrouped at another, retaking territory when the emperor's forces became overextended or withdrew. Although the conflict waxed and waned, Matilda's resolve helped ensure that the papal reform movement maintained a foothold in northern Italy. Of course, her life went into other predicted avenues for a woman as well. Matilda's first marriage took place around 1069 to Godfrey the Hunchback, also known as Godfrey IV, Duke of Lower Lorraine. Notably, Godfrey was her stepbrother via Matilda's mother and her second husband, Godfrey the Bearded. This arrangement reflects common medieval practices in which marriage among close kin could solidify family claims and protect vast inheritances. Contemporary chroniclers, including Doniso, treat the union with a certain formality but offer few details about the couple's personal rapport. They would have only one child, a daughter, but the child died a few weeks after the birth, sometime before the 29th of August 1071. Historians generally view the marriage as largely political and pragmatic. The Canossa family's ties to Lorraine gave Matilda a trans-regional alliance that could deter hostile moves from neighbouring lords or the Holy Roman Emperor. However, the relationship between Matilda and Godfrey appears to have been lukewarm at best. Evidence suggests they spent significant time apart, and the death of their only child further broke the already fragile union. Primary sources imply that Godfrey was often in Lower Lorraine dealing with territorial disputes or assisting his father, while Matilda remained in Italy, increasingly involved in the developing investiture controversy alongside her mother Beatrice. Godfrey's life ended abruptly in 1076 when he was assassinated, reportedly while in the Netherlands. Some sources place the murder in a latrine, an incident that later chroniclers sometimes treated with lurid detail. Because Matilda was already firmly rooted in her Italian domains, the cessation of this marriage did not significantly alter her trajectory. Indeed, her attention quickly pivoted to defending the Canossa estates as the struggle between Pope Gregory VII and Emperor Henry IV escalated. Despite the marriage's short lifespan and apparent lack of emotional warmth, it underscored the house's persistent strategy of using matrimonial ties to maintain a broad sphere of influence. Over a decade after Godfrey's death, Matilda entered a second union with Welf V of Bavaria in 1089. Much younger than Matilda, Welf belonged to the illustrious House of Welf, which boasted extensive territories in southern Germany. This alliance was likewise forged with an eye to political advantage, as both the Welfs and Matilda had overlapping interests in limiting imperial power under Henry IV. By linking these powerful families, the marriage promised to consolidate opposition to the emperor, while further securing support for the papal reform agenda. However, the age gap and the divergent objectives of the couple soon became apparent. While Matilda was deeply committed to her spiritual alliance with Pope Gregory VII and to defending her Tuscan holdings, Welf's priorities lay with his Bavarian inheritance and local German concerns. The marriage was short-lived. By 1095, the two had separated, and official records indicate an annulment or dissolution. Although the specifics remain obscure, contemporary chroniclers point to irreconcilable tensions around Matilda's political entanglements, suggesting Welf may have been uneasy with the intense devotion she showed to the papacy and her continuing readiness to confront imperial forces. Matilda's unwavering alignment with Pope Gregory VII from the 1070s onward provoked suspicion and hostility among enemies of the Reformed papacy, most notably loyalists of Henry IV. These adversaries occasionally weaponized rumor against her, insinuating an illicit or romantic relationship with the Pope. The function of such gossip was to discredit both Matilda's moral character and Gregory VII's religious legitimacy. Accusations of impropriety aimed to undermine public trust in the papal reform movement by painting its key patrons as hypocrites. Yet no contemporaneous source provides credible evidence to substantiate these rumors. Donizo's Vita Matildis portrays Matilda's devotion to Gregory VII in spiritual and political terms only, focusing on their shared commitment to preserving the Church's autonomy from imperial control. Likewise, the official letters and documents from Gregory's papacy reference Matilda primarily as a vital ally and benefactor, extolling her piety and generosity, but omitting any suggestion of a personal liaison. Modern historians almost unanimously dismiss these rumours as political slander. In the wake of her separation from Welf around 1095, Matilda of Tuscany found herself navigating a complex political landscape. Though she had endured 2 short-lived marriages, her authority in northern and central Italy remained formidable. Even as imperial forces had challenged her for decades, Matilda's strategic fortifications and adept governance enabled her to sustain control over key territories, from the Po Valley through the Apennines. By the late 1090s, many of the intense military conflicts that had characterized her earlier years had subsided into a war of positional maneuvering, diplomacy, and sporadic skirmishes. Matilda capitalized on these quieter intervals to rebuild local economies disrupted by long-standing warfare. Donizo's Vita Matildis indicates she undertook projects to restore infrastructure, roads, bridges, and fortifications, essential for trade routes that funneled revenue into her coffers. She channeled some of these funds to ecclesiastical patronage, founding or endowing monasteries and churches to affirm her piety and reinforce her legacy of support for the Gregorian reform movement. Her reputation for devout leadership attracted clerics loyal to the papacy, strengthening a church-based political network that extended from her Tuscan core into neighbouring regions. Monasteries and bishoprics under her aegis became centres of learning and reform, shaping doctrinal positions and fostering an educated class receptive to the papal cause. As a result, Matilda's dominions gained a reputation as safe havens for clergymen persecuted or displaced by imperial sympathisers. This policy boosted her moral standing among reformers while simultaneously forging a loyal ecclesiastical cadre, a critical advantage in an era when clerics wielded significant political influence. The Countess also leveraged these ecclesiastical relationships to maintain a robust intelligence network. Clerics who travelled regularly for synods or church business were well placed to gather information on imperial troop movements, alliances, and shifting loyalties among noble families. Matilda's ability to stay informed, coupled with the secure lines of communication afforded by her castles, helped her anticipate potential threats and rally defensive forces more efficiently. Though overshadowed by her martial endeavours, Matilda's administrative accomplishments during these years were no less significant. She continued to refine feudal obligations, standardizing taxes and labor dues across her territories. By bringing more predictable revenue streams to her treasury, she could sustain a standing defense and provide material support to the papacy without constantly resorting to emergency levies. Scholars note that this systematic approach to governance foreshadowed the later institutional developments of Italian city-states, highlighting Matilda's lasting legacy in regional administrative practices. As the power struggle between the papacy and the Holy Roman Emperor shifted in the early 12th century, So too did Matilda's alliances. Henry IV, once her most formidable opponent, faced rising discontent among the German princes, and by the first decade of the 1100s, his power had begun to wane. His son, Henry V, emerged as a rival claimant to the imperial title, culminating in Henry IV's forced abdication in 1105 and his subsequent death in 1106. Matilda recognized these developments as an opportunity to forge a new accord with the younger Henry. While Matilda never recanted her commitment to church reform, she proved willing to negotiate with Henry V in an attempt to stabilize northern Italy. Some historians argued that she saw Henry V's ascendancy as a chance to reconcile the empire with the papacy, particularly if the new emperor recognized her rights to her domains and pledged respect for ecclesiastical autonomy. According to some documents, Henry V and Matilda met several times between 1107 and 1110, with Henry reportedly granting Matilda the title of imperial vice-regent in Italy. These concessions formalized a partnership aimed at preventing further unrest in the region. Notwithstanding these negotiations, Matilda's direct military engagements began to taper off with age. Having safeguarded her lands for decades through successful castle defences and alliances with reform-minded noble factions, she now turned increasingly to diplomacy to maintain her sphere of influence. Loyal Castellans and clerical allies continued their supportive roles, ensuring that the day-to-day enforcement of her authority remained intact. During this period, Matilda also renewed her patronage of educational institutions and religious orders, reflecting her view that cultural and spiritual investments were as vital to governance as the sword. She invited scholars, chroniclers, and theologians to her court, reinforcing a circle of intellectual activity that further solidified her reputation for enlightened rule. While Donizo's chronicle focuses primarily on her piety and political triumphs, other contemporaries laud her cultural contributions, suggesting Matilda's court stood as an important centre for literary and religious discourse. Matilda of Tuscany died on July 24, 1115 at Bondeno di Roncore, located in what is now the Emilia-Romagna region of Italy. She was around 69 years old, an advanced age for her era, especially given her physically and politically demanding life. Her final illness appears to have been relatively short, although precise medical details remain lost to history. After her passing, she was first interred at the Abbey of San Benedetto Po near Mantua, a monastery she had patronized, and where her family's legacy was well honored. Centuries later, in 1634, Pope Urban VIII ordered Matilda's remains to be transported to St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, a signal tribute rarely accorded to a layperson, much less a female ruler. Even in the 17th century, her memory stood apart from most medieval aristocrats, underscoring the Church's recognition of her singular devotion and long-standing service to papal ideals. Today, a monument by Gian Lorenzo Bernini marks Matilda's final resting place, reflecting her ongoing stature as a champion of ecclesiastical liberty. In evaluating Matilda's contributions, Donizo's Vita Matildis and other contemporary chronicles emphasize her devout nature, strategic acumen, and steadfast loyalty to the papal reform cause. While these hagiographic texts can exaggerate certain virtues, modern historians generally agree that Matilda of Tuscany was a formidable political leader who wielded exceptional influence for a woman of her time. Her governance spanned diplomatic engagement, economic oversight, fortress warfare, and ecclesiastical patronage, all areas in which she left an indelible mark. Moreover, Matilda's reign challenged medieval gender norms in profound ways. She personally commanded armies, negotiated with emperors, and presided over one of the wealthiest and most politically active principalities in 11th and 12th century Italy. In the broader tapestry of European history, Matilda's stance during the investiture controversy helped tip the balance against imperial control, facilitating a greater measure of ecclesiastical independence that would influence church-state relations for centuries. Her legacy reverberates not only in the enduring importance of Canossa as a symbol of papal authority, but also in the cultural and administrative development she fostered within her domains. By the time of her death in 1115, she had spent nearly half a century shaping central Italian politics and championing ecclesiastical reforms. Her story underlines how individual agency, especially when combined with strategic resources and alliances, can profoundly affect major historical conflicts. In Matilda's case, that meant bolstering the Gregorian reform at a critical juncture and securing a lasting reputation as one of the Middle Ages' most influential female rulers. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss any new documentaries.